Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Legends of the Jedi. It's been a while. Nearly a year in fact, although if you're listening to this on YouTube, barely any time will have passed at all. I hope you've been keeping well. I can tell you that I'm really excited to return to this podcast as we begin a new chapter in the history of the Old Republic. In our last episode, many months ago, we tied up some loose ends and finished off the Tales of the Jedi storyline. This time, we're going to jump forward a few decades to the grand old year of 3964 BBY, or before the Battle of Yavin, if you remember. Last episode, I told you that by this time, the Republic had largely recovered from the devastation caused by Exar Kun and Ulic Qel-Droma in the Great Sith War. After the war, the Mandalorians retreated from Republic space and focused their efforts on rebuilding. Under the leadership of Mandalore the Ultimate, these armored crusaders built up their forces with renewed purpose. By 3964 BBY, they had spent a little over a decade skirmishing and raiding at the edge of Republic space. As we're about to see, the growing Mandalorian threat was a powder keg just about ready to explode. In today's episode, we'll be covering the first 7 issues of the Knights of the Old Republic comic series. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get into it. The Knights of the Old Republic comic series was published between January 2006 and February 2010. It was intended to be a loose prequel to the popular Knights of the Old Republic video game. The comic features several characters from the KOTOR video game, and I'll do my best to point them out as we come across them. The comic series is comprised of 52 issues, divided into 15 story arcs. It was succeeded by a 6-issue miniseries that provides a conclusion to the series and ties up some loose ends. The KOTOR comic was written in its entirety by John Jackson Miller. You may remember, I mentioned John Jackson Miller last episode as the individual who wrote the Lost Tribe of the Sith short stories and tie-in comic. Several artists were responsible for drawing the issues. In no particular order, we had Brian Ching, Travel Foreman, Dustin Weaver, Harvey Tolobeo, Bong Dazzo, Scott Hepburn, Alan Robinson, Dean Zachary, and Ron Chan. And I just want to point out how rare it is to see an entire series, comprised of 58 issues no less, to be written by a single individual. My hat goes off to Mr. Miller, who managed to write an incredible story that maintained its quality throughout. If you haven't yet read these comics, do yourself a favor and track them down on Comixology or buy one of the Marvel Omnibus collections. You don't even need to know anything about the games, although it does help. Listening to my podcast will also help, so feel free to go back and listen to some of the previous episodes if you haven't already. Also, I'll be pointing out some links to the Tales of the Jedi stories as we delve into the KOTOR comics. One last thing that's important to mention is that the events of the KOTOR comics largely take place in 3963 BBY. The only exceptions are the first several issues, which take place in the year before, 3964, and the 6-issue miniseries, which takes place in the year after, that being 3962. So, without further ado, let's activate our Mandalorian war mounts and fly straight into the Knights of the Old Republic comic, beginning with its first arc, Commencement. The very first issue, Issue 0, which is entitled Crossroads, opens with the following words. It is a time of upheaval for the galaxy. Nearly 4,000 years before the birth of Luke Skywalker, the Mandalorian Wars have strained the Old Republic's resources to the breaking point. With so many Republic forces at the front, systems in the Outer Rim teeter on the edge of lawlessness. Even the city world of Taris, which was once a thriving commercial center. Here, as elsewhere, the Republic relies increasingly on Jedi Knights and their students to help maintain order. But some Knights, frustrated with the conduct of the wars, argue for a more active Jedi role, appealing to others for support. Even from those Jedi and their untried students who are struggling to maintain order at home. So the year is 3964, and our story opens on the city planet of Taris. Taris has a lot of similarities to Coruscant, but it's not in the core, it's in the Outer Rim. High-rise metropolises cover the planet's surface. Below, there is a seedy lower city, and below that, even darker threats lurk in the Undercity. Taris also happens to be the first planet you visit in Knights of the Old Republic 1, so, needless to say, it's very important in the Old Republic era. We're introduced to 2 of our main characters right off the bat, Jedi Padawan Zayne Carrick and Snivvian criminal Marn Hierogryph. Zayne is a human sporting brown hair, a youthful face, and a green tunic. He kind of reminds me a bit of Keldroma, minus the hair color. Marn, on the other hand, looks a bit like a bipedal warthog. Snivvians have protruding jaws and short fangs. This is one of those points where I encourage you to look for images of Marn online if you don't know what he looks like. So we learn right away that Zayne Carrick has tried to capture Marn for some petty crimes on 7 separate occasions. But because Zayne is so clumsy, he has been unsuccessful every single time. Well, this time is no different. As he chases after Marn, the criminal gives him the slip, and this causes Zayne to fly off into one of the towering skyscrapers. Zayne is rescued by another Jedi Knight who we're told is called Squint. Squint is a bald human male, decked out in a red flight suit, and arguably one of the most important characters in the Knights of the Old Republic era. We'll come back to his real name in another episode. Squint was sent by Zayne Carrick's master, a Jedi named Lucien Draay, to look for Zayne and direct him back to the Jedi's base of operations on Taris. Squint is part of a group of Jedi visiting the Jedi Tower on Taris with hopes of recruiting allies for their fight against the Mandalorians at the fringes of Republic space. So after some brief introductions, Squint escorts Zayne back to the Jedi Tower. Interestingly, he tells Zayne that sometimes one has to enter into the darkness to save the light. That sounds an awful lot like what Keldroma tried to do several decades earlier, with disastrous results. Curious, isn't it? In short order, we're introduced to the Jedi Masters on Taris. There is, of course, Lucien Draay. There's a Miralukan female Jedi Master named Canilia. If you remember, Miralukans use the Force to see, as they are born without eyes. We're also introduced to Raana, a Togruta female. For those of you who don't know, Ahsoka Tano, Shakti are also Togruta. So if you have those pictures in your head, you'll get a sense of what Raana looks like. The last 2 Jedi Masters, both male, you'll likely have to look up to get a good picture of them. There is Xamar, who was a Khil. They kind of look like mind flayers with elven ears. And then you have Feln, a Feeorin, who was blue-skinned and had thick tendrils hanging from the back of his head. So after Squint and his group leaves Taris, the Miralukan master Canilia senses a disturbance in the Force. She tells Lucien about it, and the masters decide to investigate. Several days later, Zayne runs into Marn Hierogryph, also known as the Gryph, and tries to capture him again. The result is even more disastrous than the last time, as he crash lands into a banquet celebrating the forthcoming knighting ceremony that the Jedi Masters I mentioned earlier intend to perform. You see, each of those masters has a Padawan, and they're all up for knighthood. From what we know at this point, Zayne Carrick is a bit of a walking disaster, and his ascension to knighthood is very much in question. One of the other Padawans, Shad Jelavan, also happens to be Zayne's good friend. Needless to say, the Masters are not pleased. Zayne is tasked with cleaning up the mess he made. In the course of doing so, he spots Gryph and pursues him yet again, but this time he actually manages to capture him, proving, as the Dark Souls games have taught me, to just keep trying and trying until you actually succeed. When Zayne returns to the Jedi Tower, he realizes he is late for the knighting ceremony. He rushes in only to find his fellow Padawans, including Shad, dead at the feet of their masters. And this is how Issue 1 ends. We spent a bit of time on it because it really sets the stage for the rest of the series. Zayne is horrified with what he sees and wastes no time in fleeing the Jedi Tower with Gryph in tow. Both of them manage to escape to the lower city, where they eventually learn that the Jedi Masters have placed bounties on their heads. The Padawan Massacre, as it comes to be known across the galaxy, has been blamed entirely on Zayne Carrick. While hiding out in a bar, figuring out what to do next, the two have this funny exchange. Oh, maybe your master's a Bith, says Gryph.
A Sith?
Says Zayne.
Whatever, you know. The guys who ruined all the good trade routes a couple of years ago.
No, not a whiff of that. These are the teachers we've been with since we left the younglings. I've heard them talk. A lot. They hate the Sith. They hate the Sith.
So?
They're Jedi. We're not allowed to hate. Something's off here, and it was already off. Whatever happened to make the Masters do what they did, they intended the same thing for all of us. What had we done? What had we seen? What were they afraid of? Gryph, you gotta get us off-world. Not just any world. I need to go where we were trained. Everywhere we were trained. I have to retrace our lives. Whatever brought us here is back there. And the only way out of this, for both of us, is to find it.
Future's in the past, huh? Well, that fits. In my personal escape plan, going up means going down first. I hope you like mutants, freaks, and disease, intern, 'cause our way off Taris takes us to the Undercity.
So Zayne convinces Gryph to help him evade the Jedi Masters and trick them into searching through Taris' Undercity. Meanwhile, Zayne and Gryph travel to a refugee camp in a part of the lower city called Machineville. There, Gryph seeks out an old Arkanian offshoot engineer named Camper and his fierce protector, an offshoot woman named Jarael. So let's pause for a lore moment. You savvy listeners may remember that Ulic's master Arkajeth was an Arkanian. So an offshoot is a type of Arkanian that is fully albino as opposed to the usual sallow skin color that most Arkanians possess. Another interesting moment in this story is that we have the earliest usage, timeline-wise, of the title Darth. That is, at least until Darth and Dedu came around, who would have preceded the KOTOR comics. But before that, some people had theorized that Darth Revan and Malak either came up with the term or resurrected it from an ancient Rakatan word Daritha, which translates to emperor. There's also another Rakatan connection. These would be the words Dar and Ta, which together roughly translate into triumph over death or immortal. And if you're wondering who the Rakatans are, oh, just you wait, sweet summer child. They factor into the first KOTOR game big time. So Zayne is the one to use the word Darth here. You see, when he first meets Jarael, the two don't exactly see eye to eye. Here's what he says.
We're wasting time here, Gryph. This guy's idea of a radiation shielding is probably good at it and a disarming smile. No wonder he needs Darth Sunshine here for a keeper.
So, according to Zayne, Jarael is Darth Sunshine. Not a particularly flattering nickname. At the same time, Gryph is negotiating with Camper in hopes of acquiring a route off-world, but his negotiations are interrupted. As the Jedi Masters and Taris police force arrive on the scene, Zayne, Gryph, Jarael, and Camper have no choice but to launch into space aboard a junk hauler called the Last Resort. In space, the Last Resort loses power, but it's eventually restored. Our heroes, if we can even call them that, use the ship to hide out in a nearby asteroid belt. At that point, Zayne attempts to contact Master Vandar Tokare and the Jedi Enclave on the planet Dantooine. Okay, let's pause for a second. People who played KOTOR 1 will remember that Master Vandar is a member of Yoda's species, and he appears throughout the game. Dantooine, a planet that's mentioned in the very first Star Wars film, also appears in the game as one of the planets we visit. What's interesting to note here is that Master Vodo Siosk Boss, Exar Kun's former Jedi Master who was killed during the events of the Great Sith War, was the one who set up the Enclave on Dantooine. After the Sith War, the Enclave served as a satellite to the Jedi High Council, which from then on was based out of Coruscant. So Zayne calls up Master Vandar and pleads his case, but unfortunately, Master Vandar does not believe him. He tells him that Master Lucien is scion of an important family, both in the Republic and the Jedi Order. Master Vandar can't fathom a reason why 5 Jedi Masters would just mercilessly slaughter a bunch of helpless Padawans. With a whack to the head, Zayne is rendered unconscious by Jarael. It looks like his attempt to contact Master Vandar may have attracted some unwanted attention. As they continue to hide from the pursuing Jedi Masters, Zayne quickly realizes that he's on his own, and he decides to get to the bottom of why these Jedi Masters would have killed their Padawans in cold blood. At first instance, he remarks on how strange it is that 4 Jedi Consulars would be assigned to a single planet like Taris. Now, a Consular is different from a Jedi Guardian or a Jedi Sentinel. Consulars focus on the Force, rather than on combat or stealth like Guardians or Sentinels, respectively. These are 3 distinct schools of thought within the Jedi Order. Here's what Zayne has to say about Consulars.
A counselor is a specialized kind of Jedi. They focus more on cerebral force skills. There are healers, our researchers, our seers.
Jarael responds,
They don't sound so tough.
They're still Jedi. You don't mess with them.
Recalling a recent mission to Taris' rogue moon with the now-dead Padawans and their masters, Zayne decides to go back and look for clues that would explain the Master's motives. Both he and Jarael discover the Jedi's damaged droid, T1 Elbee, or Elbee for short, before narrowly escaping Lucien Draay and the Taris police, who also show up on the rogue moon in pursuit of Carrick. Back on the Last Resort, Zayne and the others examine Elbee's memory. The droid recorded the Jedi Masters experiencing a Force vision that predicted their deaths, and the deaths of many others at the hands of a red-armored Sith Lord. The Masters were convinced that this figure was one of their Padawans, since the Padawans were wearing red spacesuits identical to this mysterious red-armored figure seen in their vision. So, without even consulting other Masters, a psychologist, or even touching some grass, the Masters decided to trash Elbee on the moon. He was a witness after all. And also decided that they would kill all their Padawans in order to prevent this vision from coming true. So, there you have it. Their crazy motives laid bare for all of us to mercilessly scrutinize and criticize after the fact. Before the crew can decide what to do next, their ship is captured by the bounty hunter and pirate Valius Ying, a stocky, mean-looking blue Twi'lek covered in piercings. Ying intends to return Zayne to his master, Lucien Draay. The Gryph manages to negotiate his own release, along with the release of Jarael and Camper. Once Zayne realizes what's going on, this is what he says.
Just say it, Gryph. You're cutting me loose.
Intern. Zayne. Listen. Snivvians. My people. We play at things. Adventuring. Politics. Even crime. And I love the game. I'm good at it. But this is too much heat for me. You're a losing hand. Marks and punks I can handle. I can't angle the whole Jedi Order. Much less the Republic. And a swarm of bounty hunters. And I wish I could, because I think you could really help me. The things you can do. You could put Marn Hierogryph on the map. It's just, the way things are now.
It's alright. You got more than you bargained for. I understand. Been a nice run, though. Couldn't have gotten this far without you. See you around, Gryph.
Despite the finality in these words, Zayne doesn't decide to take this lying down. Shortly after this conversation, he tries to steal the Last Resort in an attempt to escape. Before he can get away, he's caught by Jarael. After a bit of a heart-to-heart with her, Zayne drops his lightsaber and decides to surrender to the Masters in hopes of stopping this prophecy from coming true. When Ying and Zayne arrive on Taris, we find out that the public's loss of faith in the Jedi has led to rioting and mass panic. You see, the Mandalorians are advancing ever closer, and it seems like society is starting to crumble under the pressure of that approaching threat. Zayne is delivered to Lucien in the Jedi Tower. His former master and the other Jedi Masters reveal that if there was any doubt, they did indeed kill the Padawans after they became suspicious. You see, Zayne's fellow Padawans had apparently refused to believe that a screw-up like him would be knighted alongside them. In a previous issue, we learned from a flashback that Zayne only has what Master Vandar called a marginal proclivity for the Force. In other words, he's not that strong of a Jedi. Lucien, Draay, and the others explain that the 5 Masters are part of a Jedi Covenant, a type of secret society sworn to prevent the Sith from returning. Here's what occurs.
You killed them in cold blood!
So here Lucien comes in, and he says,
They weren't innocents. Exar Kun was a Padawan once too. His master had a warning, but failed to act. That earned him death, and the Sith War.
Here Cornelia comes in. We 5 are part of a sacred trust, Zayne. A Jedi Covenant. To stand watch and make certain that never happens again. Lucien continues.
These 4 masters are among the greatest seers in the Order. And acting in unison, they see farther than any Jedi ever has. And they have seen.
The other Jedi Masters I mentioned earlier also get a word in edgewise.
The Mandalorian War and the Jedi Crusade. Events are in motion everywhere.
We've searched in all directions for the Shatterpoint, the key that will unlock the Sith menace again.
We just didn't expect to find it right in our midst.
In short order, Lucien kills the pirate Ying, again another potential witness, and advances on Zayne. Before he can deliver the killing blow with his lightsaber, Gryph, Jarael, and Camper come to the rescue. In a red spacesuit, Jarael bursts into the Jedi Tower, and begins using Zayne's yellow lightsaber blade to attack the Masters. At first believing this to be the Sith Lord from their visions, the Jedi are thrown for a loop and begin to panic. Jarael grabs Zayne and blasts off from the tower. Before Lucien can catch up with them, the duo rejoins Gryph, Camper, and Elbee on the last resort. The first story arc ends with a flash forward to 3 weeks later. Riots have broken out all over Taris. The Jedi Masters are recalled to the Republic capital of Coruscant, as the public has lost faith in the Jedi's ability to serve as their protectors and guardians. Before they leave, however, the Masters receive a message from Zayne Carrick.
Hello, Master. I'm running now, but I've had time to reflect on your teachings. You say the living sometimes have to suffer to serve a larger goal. I've seen how you live by that. Well, I have a goal now too. Justice. For myself, for my friends, for the people sacrificed to the plans of the so-called infallible. And it will definitely involve some suffering. Because you see, I've had a vision of my own. One day, one of you is going to confess and clear my name. And to make sure, I'm going to hunt down each and every one of you. The one that confesses lives. I don't care which one of you does it. It doesn't matter where they send you. You have a death mark, same as me. Don't look for me, Lucien, because I'll find you. And if I do end up collapsing the Jedi Order, just remember one thing. You started it!
Wow, what a speech. And so with that, we finish Commencement. Let the games begin. So before we wrap things up for today, I'd like to make a few plugs. The first is for myself. If you don't know, I have my own YouTube channel now. It's www.youtube.com/@Star Wars Narrator. You can find these podcast episodes on my YouTube channel, as well as short story narrations and some other Star Wars related content. The second plug is for my good friend Alex, who provided the voice of Zayne Carrick in this episode. You can find him on YouTube as MagnenoAlex, and I'll throw his link in the description. I'd also like to thank my friend Meg, who provided the voice of Jarael. She has her own channel, Meg Reviews, and if you haven't already checked it out, you should. I'll link to it in the description to this video. She does a lot of great Star Wars reviews, she dresses up, it's absolutely fantastic. So thank you again to Alex and to Meg for your help on this episode. I hope you'll join me next time as I delve further into the adventures of Zayne, Gryph, Jarael, and friends.
We would be honored if you would join us.